Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Mulartrick. I am going to talk about resource utilization, efficiency, cloud waste, everybody's favorite topic. A little bit about myself. I am also known as the Boomi Grinch. I work for Boomi, an integration platform as a service company. And I am a FinOps ambassador. I am also part of the customer advisory board for Apptio Cloudability and for the customer advisory board for AWS Marketplace. If you ever want to talk to me about AWS Marketplace, I always have an opinion. And if we have time, I'll talk about why I'm the Grinch. So first, let me give you a quick overview about, we got a problem.
So I was the only place I knew I could take it, and that was to God. Why would you
Great.
take it away? God, fix it. God, come on, help me out here.
While we're switching over, let me ask you this real quick. I kind of lied that we're supposed to block you the rest, but we also have It'll be beer and wine.
Yeah, good. If you can make it through this presentation, please go. So what is Boomi? Boomi is a market-leading integration platform as a service. Who likes to manage their own APIs and integrations today here? Anybody? Does anybody love that process? Who likes to connect their cloudability data into Snowflake? Anybody? Anybody? No. Often what you find is you either make or develop your middleware, or you can use somebody like us to integrate that data for you so you don't have to worry necessarily about the upgrades or the API changes that you need to make in the event that Snowflake changes their API. If you have any questions about it, come talk to me. So here's my agenda. I'm going to start off with a story, and then we're going to talk about waste, efficiency, and utilization. We're going to talk about the crawl, walk, and run approach, and then we're going to finish with some examples, if we have time, as well as how to measure efficiency. Oh, let me tell a little story. This is a true story. It probably will resonate with everybody here. Imagine starting at a brand new company in a brand new job, and you are responsible for the entire operation of a platform. And imagine that you start at the end of the year, and your team is not really around because people are on vacation. So you start digging into your typical onboarding experience, and you dig into, let me see what the cloud bill is here, because I have no idea. Well, you start discovering that, hey, there's this big spike that started, about a month ago, and it's kind of plateaued. So you're wondering, let me think about that and talk to my team when we get back next year. So you, of course, come back next year, and then you have that conversation with the team, and you discover, after you're probing the team, which you're meeting for the first time, that your team happened to run through a routine DR test, and they happened to leave the infrastructure on after the test was done, of course, and then went on vacation to only have a spend spike of 6 figures. So imagine having to walk into your new boss's office and have that discussion with your boss saying, I know I wasn't here, but I'm sorry we messed up and left infrastructure on and it caused an impact. Yes, that conversation is not fun. I'm sure we've all been in a scenario like that before, and we're here to talk about waste in general. So let's dive into the next topic. So what is waste? The FinOps Foundation, as part of the working group, defined waste as spend and usage that has no business value, period. So I could turn off that set of resources right now, and the only impact would be a cost efficiency improvement. Some examples. Who's got some examples? What's some cloud waste? How about those EBS volumes that are unattached? Are those is that cloud waste? Or those snapshots from 4 years ago? Does anybody need the snapshots? No? Yeah. What about those elastic IP addresses from an AWS perspective that are unassociated? They cost 5 cents an hour. That's a seemingly innocuous charge. But what happens if you have 200 of them and you leave them on for a year? That could be quite impactful. But hey, Mr. Trash Can, would you be able to help me point out a real example of where EBS snapshots were cleaned up or a policy was installed, let me call on Mr. Trash Can. Can you please point out where it is? Oh, there we go. So Mr. Trash Can helped identify 10,000 EBS snapshots from 4 years ago that were no longer needed, and a simple policy removed about $500 a day. And if you do the math on $500 a day, that's actually $182,000 over the course of a year. That's essentially somebody's salary from an engineering perspective sitting there in waste. So what's efficiency? And by definition, this is the peak level of performance by having the least amount of input to achieve the highest amount of output. Let's talk about a very simple example, miles per gallon. As most of us have gone through Rob Martin's training or Ben's training, we talk about the Prius effect, which we can get that near real-time feedback to make more efficient decisions. And an example would be if I am driving a Prius and I take my foot off the gas while going down a hill, well, I'm going to have some of that regenerative braking and get some more improvement to my miles per gallon. How many people are turning off resources on nights and weekends? Anybody? We have a couple examples. One from Boomi. Hi, Jeremy. Yeah, if you don't need resources on nights and weekends, you could potentially increase your efficiency by automating the turn off and then the turn back on of those resources. At Boomi, we've been able to build that into our culture. So anytime we're building new applications, we have them ensure that they're spinning down on nights and then spinning back up on weekends using a various set of tools. Now, what is utilization? On the right-hand side, we have New Relic. And a very simple example of utilization is going to be on the right-hand side where my CPU reaches 50% compared to 100%. Now, I would say that resource, CPU-wise, is half utilized. Now, I could right-size that opportunity, potentially, but then I'm going to put myself at risk for impacting performance or reliability, right? If we have customer-facing environments, we may not necessarily want to right-size to use 100% CPU. That's probably going to cause some sort of degradation for our customers from a right-sizing perspective. I could also hit Control-Delete on my Windows machine and go to Task Manager and take a look at my CPU utilization. Of course, you could also look at other things like network if you need network, or memory, of course, if you are memory bound. So let's bring this into the framework, and really there's a few pieces, or three things that I'm going to highlight from a resource utilization and efficiency perspective. The first one is understanding your cloud usage. This is the basic, what is my visibility, how much does Boomi's platform cost, how much does developer team A cost, developer team B cost, Jeremy's team and engineering productivity, what is your cost? Second up is going to be performance tracking and benchmarking. This is really where we're going to focus on unit costs, and I know there was a unit session earlier from TJ at Box, which was fantastic, and if you did not watch it, I highly recommend you watch it once the videos are out there. But establishing unit metrics to be able to track efficiency, and I'm actually going to walk through an example in a moment to talk about if I don't have a unit economic or a unit metric, I can make one really easy and start tracking the efficiency. And lastly, of course, is the cloud usage and optimization. This is where we're going to understand our resource utilization and set some goals. Maybe we're going to set a goal to make the Boomi platform 10% more efficient, and then start measuring what we can do, what actions we can take to make ourselves more efficient to get that 10%. So from a crawl, walk, and run perspective, I just wanted to boil it down. A crawl is the visibility. This is where we need to understand and define efficiency in general. Do we want to be CPU efficient? Do we want to be cost efficient, reliability efficient, so on and so forth? As we start moving forward, we're going to start looking at potential right-sizing opportunities. We're going to define how we're going to measure those optimization costs. And then, of course, unit costs, which I will talk about in a moment. And then when we're running, this is automatic data collection of my unit economic, my unit metric, displaying business metrics that are important to run the business on, for example. So how do I measure efficiency? So to set the picture here, the stage, this is an actual graph, or chart from Cloudability from Boomi. And in the dark blue, the line, that is cost. And this is measured over a course of 7 months here. On the light blue chart, or boxes, or I don't know why, bars, there we go, got the word. Those are usage hours. So what we can easily do, and this is a very simple EC2-based application, we can measure our cost per usage hour. It's plain and simple. Take the cost, divide it by the number of usage hours. And that's going to get, all right, 12 cents a usage hour. There's my starting point. So in the first 3 months, you can see that we had 0.12, or 12 cents, a usage hour. So what happens when we compare it to, the costs seem to drop off a cliff. What happened there? What are some reasons? Did we right-size the application? Did we change something else? Let's see. So in the next 3 months, we dropped to $86,000, a substantial decline from where we were the previous 3 months. And that almost halved the usage hours. So to move it forward, as you progress through your journey and you start creating unit metrics that are business facing, Boomi is producing bottles of whiskey here. So for this particular example, what is our quarterly cost per bottle of whiskey? Well, let's compare those 2 quarters in succession. And you can obviously see, you can see that we substantially dropped off a cliff. So we fell off about 45% from a unit cost perspective. And oh, by the way, we increased output by 40%. So we just increased the amount of bottles of whiskey substantially while reducing our unit cost. So what did we do? Why was there such a big efficiency improvement? And we get caught up in doing right-sizing activities often, but sometimes the biggest opportunities are just in code. And in this case, we made a change to our database infrastructure and code. And more or less, we were sending many, many, many gigabytes of data per month. And we actually made an efficiency increase by changing how we were sending the data, which led to basically a hockey stick drop in data. And what you're seeing is the cost go down, that's the blue line, and then you're seeing the gigabytes transferred, which became almost nothing. So let's go back to the original story. If we think about those DR resources that sat online, were they waste? Or were at one part, were they were not waste? When did they become waste? They became waste once the test was no longer needed. But before that, they absolutely were a good use of resources. Now, were the resources inefficient? That depends. It depends on the amount of volume that was going through them. Did we have an optimal CPU configuration or utilization? Not necessarily, but this particular case, right? We're testing our DR environment. Like there's a substantial reason why you want to test your DR environment. You want to make sure that you can actually execute a DR. It would totally depend on the situation if they were inefficient. But in this case, they were efficient. We were utilizing those resources until they were not being utilized. Did I make it past the first couple of months? I did. Now, the conversation with my new boss was more along the lines of own the problem. So we owned the problem, and we figured out a way to offset some of the costs that we threw out the window, more or less. Now, does Mark Butcher have any other ideas about waste and sustainability? Well, as a preview for Mark's session tomorrow, his Chalk Talk, you bet. We're going to be having a conversation with Mark tomorrow. I'm going to make myself available at this particular event to talk about more waste and efficiency. especially as it pertains to the environment. So some juicy examples. Here are a couple links. These are available on the FinOps website. And one was from the working group. There are a number of examples out there. Everything from like how to use the AWS marketplace to optimize your software licensing. So you're not buying all these licensing and then putting them on the shelf only to use them when you need them, which is a much more efficient way. To just general information about idle resources. If you're running, while we're on the topic of DR, if you are using global clusters with Aurora, MySQL, or Postgres, you certainly can, with global clusters, make sure that you don't have to have the exact same instance types in production and also in non-production or your DR environment. You can size those down, size them up dynamically, which could potentially optimize your environment. Now, if you need to execute a DR, of course, I would certainly recommend you do the test to make sure that you can get them up and running as quickly as possible. But there are certainly some ideas out there. And then from Dieter Matzian, he released a number of waste sensors that are out there on the FinOps Foundation's GitHub. And within that particular list, you're going to find all kinds of waste sensors, like making sure that there's no unattached EBS volumes, so on and so forth. So let's talk about some of the lessons that I've learned in my journey as being the FinOps lead here at Boomi. First off, right sizing is an art. It's not cut and dry. You can certainly make recommendations based upon data to engineers, and if you don't have that collaboration effect and at least talk about it, it may not even be the case. Like you could say like, oh, you should drop your size down, 2 times, and then at that point you're putting the customers at risk. So you have to weigh off, the benefits of having oversized or sized resources so you can leverage, growth and capacity. I did try the bottles of beer trick where I compared cloud usage to bottles of beer. It didn't work for me. So I tried it, and basically the feedback I got was like, nah, this just isn't exciting for us. I'd rather talk about money. Some engineers are motivated by money. Some are motivated by, say, the greenhouse gas output. You certainly could, break it down into here's the carbon footprint for your resources, and because they're underutilized, here's the extra carbon footprint for your resources. Motivations matter. Bringing data to the engineers and getting it, I heard Riley talk about this earlier, getting that data into where the engineers operate, so the backlog is extremely important. And you want to make sure that these items are not coming in from email or Slack or whatnot, because they likely won't be picked up. Engineers have a backlog. They've got a list of priorities that they're working on. So if you get it into a service request and have that conversation, you're more likely to get that engineers to take action. But conversely, if you develop champions can help even more, because they are now looking out for opportunities, and they will fix them, hopefully, in non-production before it even makes it up to production. Don't drop right-sizing recommendations on your CFO's desk, please. That's your new budget, so good luck. Without having any conversation with engineers, you must talk about it with engineers. As soon as you show the money to the finance people, Mike, the finance people will adjust your budget and expect you to meet those numbers, even though it may not be possible. And lastly, this one is interesting from my perspective, as I heard Riley talk about it as well. But if you measure cost per engineer versus each other, I find it to be very dangerous. The reason is teams operate differently. Like you might have one team that has a set of resources that is exactly the same month over month, and then you might have an infrastructure team that is building new stacks and tearing them down all the time. Those are not comparable. I find it much better to compare amongst teams as in the same team. So comparing a team month over month to understand the efficiency, especially if there are opportunities so they can easily see that feedback to bring down or improve the cost efficiency. I hope you really enjoyed my presentation because now it is time to almost get out of here unless you have questions. So please, questions.
Q&A for Eric.
Oh, wow, tough crowd. Everyone wants to go. Okay.
The beer is not in the hallway yet. Ask Eric a question.
Wait, I got one. Why? Yep. Go ahead.
So bring data to the engineer, put it in the form of a ticket. You mentioned Jira. I find that to be interesting. So can you give an example of that? Was like, would you have a right sizing recommendation for a specific workload and you put that into a ticket? Is that is that an example of what you're saying?
Right. Like if I talk to the engineers, I understand like what the application is doing, and I look at the data, leveraging New Relic to collect like CPU data or New Relic to collect memory data, so on and so forth. I will build a business case that says, your application looks better on this type of footprint, and let's have a conversation about it. And I'll open up a ticket with that data and then include it, and then we'll have the conversation.
Yeah, that's an interesting. We do that, but that's not a way in which I have thought of before, as opposed to emails and other throwaway
Emails in Slack usually equates to no action being taken.
Thank you.
Or it's not a priority. I get that a lot.
Question on right sizing. So we've got a memory intensive application which requires that we would need to have more than just CPU utilization data. We certainly need to have memory, but as I started to poke into that, we don't have agents installed to collect that on a good portion of our resources. And we also have a lot of, I'll call pets in regards to EC2 resources, which then means getting that deployed, a tracking agent to then bring reports forward becomes even more difficult. I didn't know if that's something that you've encountered. What I'm understanding, and I don't have a technical background, is that that's a very massive hill to climb, which then kind of keeps me, in this spot of, well, if I can't give utilization data, then it's really tough to right size, but if can't get it deployed, then how do we take action?
Do you have an observability platform?
Yes, homegrown, but not covering the development side at this moment.
Okay. Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion, to find access to the observability platform to collect that memory data, because usually you're going to pipe in memory data from that. I mean, that's a tough one from non-production perspective. Like, you would have to make the justification that we need to install the AWS, depending on your cloud provider, of course, the agent to be able to pipe that data back. But I would kind of formulate it and shop it around and see, like, look, I'm looking to install this for this reason, to get us better data to make ourselves more efficient. It's going to be hard, in my opinion, to argue with that if you're aligned at the executive level.
Yeah, app teams that are too afraid to have their solution reboot are typically FinOps teams' least favorite folks.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about your optimization on the database, some queries, and then you saved a lot, right? How did you come to know about that all of a sudden? Like 3 months you were spending, and did you think about re-architecting your solution, or did anything pop up?
So it was more or less from that particular example. Long story short, we had migrated into AWS probably about 6 months before, or not 6 months, about 8 months before that. Like, it was close. So we basically saw the same like data pattern of data transfer since we migrated. And one of the things that I wanted to look for, comparing the old to the new, is I knew exactly what the cost of the application was. So I compared the old to the new, and I'm like, this does not make any sense. What is going on here? So we kind of assumed that the data was just there, and our old provider was doing it in a different way. Like, we spread out across availability zones. So when it's talking to the database exists in a single availability zone, so it's all the app servers sending the data to it, which is accumulating those costs. But it just so happened, as we started digging into it with the engineers, because it was so much more expensive than it was previously, that's when we had the aha moment that, like, ooh, maybe we're not doing this the right way. Maybe we should change it. And we changed it, and sure enough, it made a huge, impact to our margins at the end of the day. Big.
I'm going to put a plug out because you put the link up there for the resources, the
Yeah.
Reducing Waste project. If you go to FinOps.org and under the projects on our website, FinOps.org, there is Reducing Waste. It's an output from a working group that Eric and myself and a number of other practitioners worked on. And they put in the most common solutions, problems and solutions that they were finding across all cloud vendors, cloud platforms, along with success stories. I believe there were some failures. If you ever want to hear some failures, I got plenty to tell you too. But those things happen. So those definitely go check those out. And you were referencing Dieter's waste sensors, right, on the GitHub page. So we'll get that link in clickable format out to you all somehow. Oh, you know what I'll do? We'll put that link in the attendees Slack channel, the FinOps X attendees Slack channel for you. That way you can actually click it. It'll be fun, much more fun to do.
Yeah, so there's one more question from Sarah. Why am I the Grinch? Well, Joe, I don't know if you remember this, but it actually came from your inspiration. Talking about holiday time, right? Typically, people are going on vacation or not going to be around. So I thought of a somewhat creative way, although you've done it before when you were at Nationwide, correct? More or less, doing a play on myself as the Grinch, and the Grinch does not like when your resources are being left online when you're not around. So I made a big campaign to literally shut off like everything in non-production. Like we had nothing on, and it was like the difference was like I think it was 240,000. Like it was something ridiculous over the course of like 2 weeks. And after that, I just started getting referred to as the Grinch. And in Slack, people made all these different little emoticons for the Grinch and different holidays. So every time we have a holiday that comes up, we make a push to make sure our stuff is being shut off. So it's stuck. And I've kind of played off of that persona ever since. And that was years ago. In true Grinch fashion. All right, everybody, let's get out of here. Thank you.
All right, Eric Mulartrick, what a finish.
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.